Hello, welcome to Unit 4. This unit is all about transport. So we started off the year talking about investigations because we're going to be doing investigations throughout every unit. And then in our second unit, we started talking about the cell, right? The basic unit of life. And as we talked about the cell, we talked about levels of organization, and then we got to biomolecules. And biomolecules are obviously what we eat, and then what our cells use to perform all of our basic life functions and maintain that stable internal environment, the all important homeostasis. So now, after that, we've passed through Unit 3, where we talked all about nutrition, our digestive system, and how our body breaks down these biomolecules. And now, as we get to transport, we're going to talk about how these different particles, these different organic compounds, different gases, different things that are in our bodies, all different things, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, transport throughout our bodies via diffusion and active transport. So we're going to start today with Unit 4, Day 1. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, and this is going to correspond with your handout that you guys are looking at, but it's going to be in this PowerPoint format. So Unit 4, Transport, and as we talk about transport throughout our bodies and into and out of the cell, we're obviously going to be talking all about the cell membrane, and here is the cell membrane. So congratulations that we've gotten to Unit 4, and we're going to talk now about transport, which is, oh, my cat is really excited to transport herself into this room through the door. And the door is the perfect metaphor for the cell membrane that controls what goes in and out of the cell. And it is a locked door, right, that controls what goes in and out of the cell. And depending upon what it is, right? If it fits through either the protein channel or if it can pass through the phospholipid bilayer itself, depends upon if it can get into the cell. And the cell membrane obviously maintains the integrity of the cell itself. So, today's aim, how does the structure of the cell membrane help its function? And we just said, what is the function of the cell membrane? So, the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, and those things mean the same thing, controls what goes in and out of the cell. And how does its structure, its phospholipid structure, help it control what goes in and out of the cell, help it perform its function? The second question here. Question number 2. Damage to which structure will most directly disrupt water balance within a single-celled organism? So a single-celled organism, the entire organism is one cell, right? So what is going to disrupt the balance of water inside of the cell? What controls how much water goes in and out of the cell? You might not have thought about this, but now as we discuss transport, it is the cell membrane, right? Just like your skin on the outside of your body controls what goes in and out of your body, the cell membrane is the external or outer layer for a single celled organism. But the cell membrane is the external layer for all of our cells. And what goes in and out of our cells is extremely important to maintaining the life functions of the entire organism. And another way to say that is our homeostasis. Always keep homeostasis right at the forefront of the mind and living environment. That's what it's all about, folks. So, now this passage is on your handouts, so let's go ahead and read it together. One way that a cell maintains homeostasis is by controlling the movement of substances across the cell membrane. The cell membrane performs two primary functions. It separates the cell from its environment, providing protection and support, as well as enables communication. And this is key, right? Chemical communication also is part of the function of the cell membrane, right? So it controls what goes in and out of the cell. And this word homeostasis is already coming up here. I cannot annotate on my screen uh, to show this to you this way, but you should be annotating on your notes. So One way that a cell maintains homeostasis is by controlling the movement of substances across the cell membrane, right? What goes in and out of the cell. And its two primary functions: separating the cell from its environment, providing protection and support. So enclosing the cell from its external environment, and enabling communication and movement of materials between the cell and its environment. Without the cell membrane, there would be no cell. The composition of nearly all cell membranes is a double-layered sheet called the lipid bilayer or phospholipid bilayer. These are two layers of lipids, hence the name bilayer. The lipid bilayer gives cell membranes a flexible structure that forms a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. Now remember, the cell membrane is not the main structural support for plant cells. Plant cells are supported by the rigid cell wall. And animals, the organism itself is supported by something else rigid, the skeleton. So the cell membrane is providing protection and support for the cell, but it's not really providing that main structure. Its primary functions: separating the cell from its environment, providing protection and support. And you can see there it is highlighted in the passage, and enabling communication and movement of materials between the cell and its environment. What is a lipid bilayer or phospholipid bilayer means the same thing. What is its function? These are two layers of lipids, right? That name bilayer, two layers, hence the name bilayer. And it gives the cell a flexible structure that forms a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. So it's lipids, right? So that's oils. So it is flexible, and it is also hydrophobic, and it has hydrophilic heads. And forgive me, we're about to go into this, but its special non-polar structure prevents water from being able to just pass through at any time. And instead, has this semi-permeable property that protects the cell. The lipid bilayer is two layers of lipids. It gives the cell membrane a flexible structure that performs a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. So here we are. This is the cell membrane, and you can see there the heads and the tails of this phospholipid bilayer. So this is one layer, and this is the second layer, and you can see these tails touch each other and the heads line up on the outside. So these are the phospholipids here on the outside of the cell, and that's what has the heads and the tails. These are carbohydrate chains that come out of the cell membrane. And on your handout, these aren't like separately labeled, they're already labeled for you. These are protein channels, which we're going to talk about, that are involved in active transport. And the phospholipids are semi-permeable, so they're involved in diffusion, and we're going to use dialysis tubing later to mimic the structure of the cell membrane, the semi-permeable property. And then they're embedded in the cell membrane is cholesterol, and I don't think that's on your handout. But cholesterol is obviously another lipid. It's fatty, and it contributes to this semi-permeable property of the cell membrane. So phospholipids, special lipid made out of a phosphate head, and there's the head, and two fatty acid tails. The head is polar and attracted to water, right? So the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails make the cell membrane semi-permeable. So the outsides that touch the environment outside of the cell, and then the cytoplasm on the inside of the cell, are polar and attracted to water, right? So this aqueous environment, this water environment, is attracted to that. However, behind these heads are these fatty acid tails that are non-polar and repel water. So this prevents things that should not go into the cell from entering the cell, right? Because without the cell membrane, there is no cell. So this semi-permeable structure allows the cell membrane this phospholipid structure allows the cell membrane to be semi-permeable, which allows it to perform this important function of controlling what goes in and out of the cell and helping maintain homeostasis within the cell. So the carbohydrate chains, carbohydrates on the outside of the cell membrane, these chains usually stick out from the surface and act as identifying markers on cells. So these are receptors, receptor sites for bonding and for chemical communication within the organism and between cells. Protein channels, which are involved in active transport, they're found in the plasma membrane. And remember, plasma membrane just means cell membrane, and allows necessary substances or waste materials to move in and out of the cell. And cholesterol, that prevents the plasma membrane's fatty acid chains from sticking, right? So this is embedded in here, and it is still a lipid, but it is a different lipid, and it prevents these fatty acid tails from sticking to each other. And that is not labeled on your structure, but you can see it here. And this is another illustration of this very important polar hydrophilic head and non-polar fatty acid hydrophobic. So that means hydro is water, right? So both of these things say hydro. Philic means to love, right? So the heads love water, but the inner tails fear water. So this means that they can touch the aqueous environment outside of the cell and the aqueous environment inside of the cell, the cytoplasm. But the water isn't going to get out of the cell. This is what makes the cell membrane an enclosed structure. It's this fatty property that allows it, you know how oil and water don't mix? Well, this is the oil part. And that oil enclosed, almost like a plastic bag, prevents the cytoplasm from leaking out and gives the cell its structure. This is another illustration here, and these are transport happening within the cell membrane, right? So lipid-soluble molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water can be transported through, but they can't go through all at once, right? So this is semi-porous, right? It allows controlled transport into and out of the cell, maintaining an attempt at balance or equilibrium within and outside of the cell of different substances. And that balance is actually critical to how this transport happens. So the polar heads are hydrophilic, water-loving, and the nonpolar tails are hydrophobic or water-fearing, and this makes the membrane selective in what crosses, right? So this is what helps the cell membrane perform its function. This structure, the polar heads and the nonpolar tails, make the cell membrane selectively permeable. Now let's go to the last two questions. So the cell membrane is said to be a fluid mosaic model. And what does that mean? So fluid, because individual phospholipids and proteins can move around freely within the layer like it's a liquid. So these protein channels aren't necessarily fixed, and they aren't necessarily in the same place all the time. Especially remember when we looked at animal cells, right? They're round, they're moving, and they are not fixed. So there is a fluid aspect to this. However, because it has that oil property, right? That lipid property, it is enclosed. It's not leaking out, but it does move around. Kind of, I'm imagining right now as I describe it to you, a lava lamp, right? And that might help you envision what this fluid mosaic is as far as the cell membrane. And then mosaic, because of the pattern produced by the scattered protein molecules when the membrane is viewed from above. And so this cell membrane, and we can't see this, you know, with our naked eye, but on your handout, as you look at the image, this is the fluid mosaic model with the scattered proteins. It looks very mosaic-like, right? And a mosaic is like something like this is a mosaic, right? So all of these different pieces that make the structure that is semi-permeable, like all of these different tiles make the image that is beautiful. And that's all I have for you today, folks. So our aim was, how does the structure of the cell membrane help its function? And this was Unit 4, Transport, Day 1. Please make sure to go ahead now and complete your exit ticket. Go ahead and give a thumbs up to this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the little bell for notifications so you see when I post these videos at 8:30 in the morning, or sometimes at 3 p.m. It depends. All right, guys, have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you all tomorrow on Zoom. Bye, guys.